Making headlines for this week of October the 7th. Colombians speak. Voter rejection of peace accord sends mixed messages as to how result is interpreted. Russian ultimatum. U.S. has its back against the wall as world turns against former superpower. Muscle flexing. Yuan enters FDR basket and seeks to exert greater financial influence at the IMF. And One Belt, One Road. William Engdahl offers insights into what he calls the Eurasian century.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. Given that September 30th was the end of the U.S. fiscal year and that the Chinese yuan entered into the IMF basket of global currencies known as the Special Drawing Rights, or SDR, on October the 1st, it has perhaps been an unusually quiet week. For the active followers of alternative geopolitical and geoeconomic events, they may have been expecting fireworks throughout this week and are perhaps understandably a bit disappointed that a more public collapse or transformation of the global cabal is not happening. News that is revealed via the mainstream is the news that is meant for the public to consume. To my knowledge, there may have been references made in the media about the yuan joining the IMF basket of currencies, but I do not believe it was given the attention that perhaps it deserved, given that the yuan is now gold-backed and that China is going to be able to exert greater geo-economic influence. Instead, the media seems to be more interested in the alleged conflict being stirred up in the South China Sea. Just because things do not appear to be happening does not mean that things are not happening at all. Believe me, it is as frustrating for me to write and say this as it is, no doubt, for many of you to hear it. But whether we like it or not, there is not only the bigger picture going on, but also the bigger picture of the meaning behind it all. And this may require certain smaller events to happen once an initial trigger, such as the end of the U.S. fiscal year, and perhaps another being the introduction of the yuan into the IMF basket of currencies. The very fact that it was not given extensive media coverage may offer a hint that the story is that much more significant in the overall picture of global change when considered alongside the geopolitical events also happening. Rumors in some circles are swirling about as quickly as the winds of Hurricane Matthew this week that the storm has been man-made and as yet is another weapon of mass distraction to keep the people of the U.S. focused on something else other than the political financial events that are allegedly taking place now. Financial news will come up shortly. Leading off this week, we have some developing events unfolding in Colombia in South America. News in this country has become increasingly more important this week because the events are directly related to the word peace and the desire to achieve peace, especially in Colombia, a country that has been experiencing conflicts and war for over 50 years. The challenging question is in discerning why. There are some events, however, that are also suspicious that may lead one to wonder what is really going on in Colombia. Let's see if we can begin to piece together a bit of history with what is currently unfolding. I want to make it clear that I do not yet have a full understanding of what is going on in Colombia and who is genuinely interested in peace and who is being manipulated by whom. There is the historical perspective to be considered, and there are questions directly related to the events of the past week that are extremely important to the overall picture in Colombia. Hopefully, I will be able to assist listeners in discerning the stories and learning how to connect dots and ask questions that the mainstream media are not asking, nor do they care to ask. On October 3rd, the people of Colombia were asked to vote on whether or not they supported a peace deal that was reached between the government of Juan Manuel Santos and the rebel group known as FARC. In what appears to be a growing similarity among voting results, the public was informed that voters narrowly defeated the peace accord with a 50.2% against and 49.8% voting for it, or yes. The Britannica.com website identifies FARC as a guerrilla organization founded in 1964 as a military wing of the Colombian Communist Party. The group is believed to be primarily of rural residents who oppose the interference of multinational companies and governments in Colombia and also support a redistribution of wealth from the rich to the poor. FARC has been linked to bombings, kidnappings, hijackings, and drug trafficking, making it a fair target for the Western media to demonize. As one learns about this story, or almost any other story that is similar, and that is that one person's freedom fighter could also be another person's terrorist. This is why it is so challenging at this time to grasp who is standing for what, why they are standing for it, and how are groups getting their funding. It has long been suspected that the CIA in the U.S. has been running drugs from Colombia into the U.S. to finance their operations, just as they have been doing with drugs from Afghanistan and other countries. It is also known how Western interests intentionally fund and support both sides of a conflict if it will help support a particular agenda to control a particular country or its leader. It is also not much of a secret that the U.S. has been actively trying to destabilize many countries in South America, and Colombia has long been a target of those interests. According to Telesur TV back in April, the former right-wing president of Colombia, Álvaro Uribe, was calling for people to vote against the peace deal. Uribe is considered to be the leader of the No campaign and has had the strong backing of large landowners in the country. In another Telesur article, they reported that Uribe and big landowners, supported by the right-wing media in a fear-mongering campaign, contributed to an extremely low voter turnout, where only 13 million out of a total of 35 million eligible voters came out. In the same article, they reported that despite the recent setback, Bolivia's President Evo Morales said on Tuesday he is confident that peace in Colombia will be achieved and that the best way to consolidate a peaceful agreement is through dialogue, adding that peace cannot be guaranteed without social justice. Bolivia's indigenous president called on Colombians to reach peace with sovereignty, with identity, and dignity. One CVN listener from Colombia wrote to me and shared the following. The agreement was made in a way that made us feel uncomfortable about it, almost all in secrecy, and with a lot of points that didn't feel fair, like us giving too much space and them not giving back money or other stuff in return. As far as I know, there is still willingness to get into an agreement. The people were cut off from negotiations, and it showed up in the no response. We need to know more. The listener felt that something was wrong with both sides, and the voter choice to reject the deal reflects the desire of the people to state that they deserve to know more and participate more in any process involving peace in their country. With negotiations taking place secretly in Cuba, one could perhaps argue that the peace process was carried out in the same way the negotiations for the 3 global trade deals were carried out, secretly and without much public knowledge. Another individual from Colombia wrote to me also. If I understood her comments in Spanish correctly, she wrote about how politicians were killing each other in the past and that people were getting fed up with power being in the hands of the few, including the wealthy landowners. This is what has led to the rise of various rebel groups, including FARC. She spoke of how Uribe and Santos used to be friends, but had a falling out, and this had led to the current situation of Uribe leading the No campaign and Santos pushing for the Yes campaign. Apparently, the argument also included text to address gender and transgender equality, and this was causing great discomfort among many of the traditional church-goers in the country, causing them to vote no. She goes on to state that FARC wants peace, but on their terms. The government wants peace, but on its terms. She then asks, do Colombians want peace? She answers yes, but each individual will accept peace only on his or her beliefs, and does not appear willing to transcend whatever historical pains each individual may be feeling inside. She believes that the global banking cabal was not involved in corrupting the vote, and it is possible that this may be true, although there are signs suggesting that there is some kind of influence coming from somewhere. Her comments have proven the point that I was trying to make while at the University for Peace, and why I believe this institution is not committed to true holistic peace in the world. The university is only interested in the glory of the business of peace. My master's thesis explained that there is no broadly accepted, holistic definition for the word peace. Everyone defines peace according to specific beliefs of the individual or the group. Leaders claim to want peace or to enforce peace on their terms. Negotiators claim to negotiate peace on their terms. Researchers attempt to measure and quantify peace on their terms to support the message they are trying to communicate. Academics claim to study peace and apply their beliefs to it, while institutions claim to teach peace but only on their own agenda of making money, while doing nothing but claiming glory for doing nothing to create true holistic peace. If you haven't guessed already, I admit that I am deeply, deeply saddened by what the University for Peace represents, and this is why I sent letters to them asking to return my degree in exchange for a full refund of my tuition, a demand that they have never replied to, out of fear for what it might do to their reputation. This is why I have also proposed a definition for peace on my website and through my work. This brings us to October 7th, and RT reported that despite the voter result rejecting the peace deal, this year's Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos for his resolute effort to bring the country's more than 50-year-long civil war to an end, the Nobel Committee announced in Norway's capital, Oslo. Santos received the prestigious prize for securing a peace accord with FARC rebels, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, back in September after nearly 4 years of negotiations. The Straits Times news website reported on September 29th that the Colombian Peace Accord was a leading contender for the Peace Prize, perhaps referring to the agreement itself, and not necessarily to the actors involved in the agreement. Does anything seem a bit suspicious to you about this? Many of the Western media were very quick to announce the same thing to the world, that Santos had received the Peace Prize, but I immediately had an observation, and it was the first thing that came to my mind when I read of the announcement, and it was the same observation that Telesur came to in another article. They reported the following: Santos and FARC leader Timoleon Jimenez, better known as Timochenko, were long rumored to be contenders for the prestigious prize. However, the Nobel Committee only awarded the Colombian president the award. Despite being pushed by journalists, the Nobel Committee representative refused to comment as to why the award was not given to Timochenko. For his part, Timochenko appeared unbothered by the fact that he was not awarded the Peace Prize alongside Santos. The only prize we strive for is peace with social justice for Colombia, said the FARC leader on his Twitter account after the announcement. The fact that Santos, at least so far, has appeared unwilling to acknowledge the role of Timochenko Jimenez for his counterpart in FARC in the negotiation process, combined with the fact that negotiations were held secretly, suggests something highly suspicious, at least perhaps to me. The fact also that Jimenez very graciously acknowledged not being selected and focused on the higher prize as being peace for Colombia gives me optimism that this group genuinely desires peace in Colombia, and that there are interests both inside and outside Colombia that are seeking to prevent peace from coming to the country. If the deal was truly sincere, and if it was recognized by honorable international interests, why was the award not offered to both Santos and Jimenez? What I am beginning to wonder is whether or not both leaders would have been accepted for the prize had Colombians voted in favor of the deal. Are Western interests attempting to sabotage the deal by excluding Jimenez in a desire to get people angry and back into a state of violence again? What signal is being sent with the awarding of this prize this week in the follow-up to a public vote to reject the deal? The people of Colombia, for their part, appear to be committed to peace, but they want peace to be more open and transparent than what they were offered in a secretive deal. Telesur reported on October 5th hundreds of thousands of people in the major cities around Colombia coming out and calling for peace in the country. According to the article, social movements in Colombia opposed to what they called a pact between elites following Sunday's no win in the peace vote, called for the demonstration. The Patriotic March said that the vote cannot be seen as a victory for the no campaign or those against peace. The group said that the peace deal negotiated and signed in Cuba was the best option to move towards peace. The Patriotic March also called for national mobilizations in support of peace for October 14th. The People's Congress, an organization made up of hundreds of Colombian campesino groups, said in a statement that Santos's negotiating with Uribe equated to a pact between elites. We firmly reject a path of a closed and elitist pact of the right wing, which again excludes the common people, and it is a sure way to a new cycle of violence, said the Congress. So we have a current president and a former president who appear to be against each other in this peace accord. We have a rebel group consisting of ordinary people upset with the power of elites and wealthy landowners who have been accused of being terrorists for decades. We have a current leader who negotiates an allegedly historic peace deal, but does so secretly and receives the Nobel Peace Prize for his secretive work, while excluding the representative of the people's movement and the people of the country who contributed to his winning the prize. In other geopolitical news, it would seem at this time that the world powers appear to be lining up against the cabal controllers of the U.S. A new fiscal year appears to have started, as mentioned, and it is perhaps no surprise that just after a rare black moon that occurred on September 30th also, that the U.S. may be on the verge of getting karma thrown back at it. However, there may still be some interesting chess moves going on publicly and behind the scenes. What may also be a surprise, or perhaps maybe a clever geopolitical move, the U.S. Congress voted to override a veto, allegedly issued by President Obama, to allow victims of 9/11 to sue Saudi Arabia for its involvement in the events of 9/11. The vote, according to some, is a slap in the face to Obama. Perhaps to others, it may have been a calculated risk. Obama, knowing that the Republicans have been trying to destroy his legacy ahead of an election, perhaps intentionally vetoed the legislation, knowing that Congress would attempt to override it, just to spite Obama and try to make him look bad. This seems very unusual because it was the Republican Party under Bush that was in power on 9/11, and it might seem that either Republicans are trying to distance themselves from the truth now coming out about 9/11, or they have been told by someone, maybe even Obama himself, to override the veto because something else is about to unfold. Observe what RT reported in an article on September 28th. Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid, a Democrat, was the only one who voted to sustain the veto, The Hill reported. The two senators to abstain were Vermont Independent Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton's running mate, Tim Kaine, perhaps suspicious by itself. It seems significant, although I cannot yet say why, that two key figures in the current U.S. election campaign chose to abstain from a vote to override an executive order from Obama. RT also reported that Obama vetoed the bill, explaining that the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, also known as JAFTA, would erode the doctrine of sovereign immunity and expose the U.S. to lawsuits around the world. The override vote was the single most embarrassing thing the Senate has done over 2 decades, White House spokesman Josh Earnest told reporters on September 28th. Through all the charades in the last 2 years where Republicans have tried to embarrass Obama by threatening a government shutdown, they have never taken a vote to override an executive order. Until now. Why now? And why with this particular legislation that is linked to events that the Republican Party itself is directly connected to? Russian President Putin is trained in martial arts. Although Obama is not, there may be one way in which he can use a martial arts principle that is found in the art of jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is the art of using the force of an attacking opponent against the opponent. For example, instead of trying to block or resist a punch from an adversary, one who is trained in jiu-jitsu will move in such a way so as to grab the opponent and allow the punch to continue, and thus throwing an opponent off balance. Knowing that people in Washington are against him and that many in the general public are also against him, at least some of his actions appear to be giving his opponents the power, and he is grabbing them and allowing their force to continue, but it could end up putting them all off balance. Humans are beginning to awaken all over the world, and we have to also consider that there will be humans among this group known as the global cabal who are also awakening and are wanting to do the right thing and have been waiting for the appropriate time to do something. At this time of intense energies coming to the planet, as has been reported previously, we cannot jump to any conclusions or assumptions because things are playing out on multiple levels, and we have to try to be careful to discern the information we are hearing so that we can help manifest an outcome that is for the highest good of humanity and the planet, and not necessarily what one may feel is for the best for oneself in any current moment. This week, sources have suggested that World War III is beginning to play out in Syria. The global cabal appears to be desperate to get a war started because only a war can achieve the 2 main goals they need to stay in power: keeping the debt-based financial system alive and to keep people in fear and separation, and therefore under control. The Geopolitics News website reported on October 3rd that after the abrupt end of a week-long Syrian ceasefire, the Russian-led coalition raised the ante against Daesh terrorists who are still holding 275,000 Aleppo residents in Syria hostage. Rightly so, as the U.S. State Department are just wasting time of the Syrian-Russian side over and over again by agreeing to multiple ceasefires that they can't uphold, but actively sabotage to the advantage of the Daesh terrorists. The article revealed the following. Another devastating leak from the U.S. State Department was the audio conversation between Secretary John Kerry and Syrian opposition groups, illustrating that while Kerry was negotiating with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov for a Syrian ceasefire, Kerry was actually for military intervention all along, using the false flag chemical attack as the basis. With more, we have this report from RT.
An audio recording of the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry talking behind closed doors to a group of Syrian civilians has been leaked to the New York Times. It's a 40-minute conversation that took place on the sidelines of last week's UN General Assembly in New York. Emily Sue's here to take us through what was said. Well, where do we start here then?
Well, Kevin, as you've said, these leaked recordings came from discussions U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had with a bunch of representatives from different Syrian opposition groups. Now, we can't show you the original recording, but we can show you what was said and about how John Kerry is simply frustrated with the U.S. policy in Syria. Let's take a listen.
I think you're looking at 4 people in the administration who've all argued for use of force, and I lost the argument. I argued for use of force. I stood up. I'm the guy who stood up and announced we're going to attack Assad because of the weapons. And then, things evolved into a different process. A lot of us wish there was an enforcement mechanism right now. A lot of us have been fighting for, but we don't have it right now in that sense. We're trying to pursue diplomacy, and I understand it's frustrating. You have nobody more frustrated than we are.
Well, as you can tell from the tone of these leaked recordings, it's obvious that Kerry is pretty much looking for excuses to justify why there is simply not enough help from the U.S. At least that's how the Syrians feel. And keep in mind that these leaked recordings came just days after the ceasefire brokered by the U.S. and Russia in Geneva has failed. Now, judging from what Kerry said, it looks like he was quite reluctant to find a solution for the crisis in Syria via diplomatic means. And as we all know, diplomacy simply doesn't work if one side doesn't want to be diplomatic.
One of the target cities in Syria is the city of Aleppo. And we join an interview in progress on Press TV with a political analyst offering his insight on what is happening in this city.
Well, it's crossed over to San Juan, joined by political analyst Mr. Lajos Zasti. Tell me about your take on this latest offensive. Of course, depending on the television station that one may watch, it's a totally different take on actually what is happening in Aleppo. How do you see this current offensive by the Syrian military?
Well, the Syrian military, what it wants is to liberate the eastern part of the city of Aleppo, which it has been taken hostage by the radical Sunni terrorist sponsored, various groups sponsored by the United States and its allies, such as Israel, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Jordan, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, etc. And they want to free the city, the eastern half, and they want to liberate the citizens. Now, Western media, as part of a propaganda war, of an information war, directed, supervised by the major Western powers involved in supporting the terrorists, such as the United States, the British, the French, Germany, and its allies in NATO. They are painting the picture, and by the way, the United Nations too, due to the control, the financial control that, for instance, the United States, Saudi Arabia have over the United Nations, and the influence, of course, political influence that the U.S. exercises over these international organizations. They paint the picture as if the Syrian Air Force and the Russian Air Force, they are targeting deliberately hospitals and civilians, and that is false. That's propaganda. That's what they want is for the supporters, the sponsors of these Sunni terrorists in the West, to try to allay public opinion in their support. They cannot defeat the Syrian government. They don't have the courage to confront Syria's Russian allies. But they at least try to win the propaganda war, because that could bring, of course, economic sanctions, political isolation as a way to pressure Moscow and its allies in terms of their support for Syria.
The article suggests that the U.S. is finding itself increasingly on the losing side of public opinion, and that there is a major shift happening in the Middle East with regard to the U.S. and its warmongering practices. Aleppo is not the stronghold that the Western media is claiming it is. Vanessa Beeley, writing for the 21st Century Wire, wrote on October 1st that the Syrian people are suffering under the moderate rebels and opposition forces backed by the U.S., NATO member states, and their allies in the Gulf states and Israel. Yet their suffering is largely ignored in the mainstream media unless it furthers the agenda dictated by the State Department. The NATO-aligned media maintains a tight grip on information coming out of this beleaguered city, ensuring that whatever does come out is tailored to meet State Department requirements for advocacy for regime change. The propaganda mill churns out familiar tales of chemical weapons, siege, starvation, and bombs targeting civilians, all of which are attributed to the Syrian government and military, with little variation on this theme. Daniel McAdams, writing for the Ron Paul Institute, also agrees that everything we hear about Aleppo is wrong. He has a 24-minute interview with Vanessa Beeley, mentioned moments ago, and the link is in the show summary for those wishing to hear Beeley's greater and more extensive report on what is happening in Aleppo in Syria. While the U.S. and perhaps Canada also get bombarded with minute-by-minute updates about Hurricane Matthew in Florida over the weekend of October the 1st, the more awake people will start to ask questions and make observations about things that may be happening because the hurricane may be attempting to distract people from something else. There could be banking events going on, such as a possible collapse of Deutsche Bank in Germany or one of several other banks. There are events unfolding in Syria involving Russia, and there may be several other possible reasons for a distraction event also. RT reported on September 23rd that Washington is experiencing a mutiny over the Syrian conflict. Assuming that this headline to be true for a moment, it could explain why there are so many distraction-level events occurring in the U.S. at the same time. This article writes that the U.S. Defense Department effectively rebelled against the President's authority when it said it may or we may not comply with the ceasefire. This, according to a former MI6 agent and founder of the Conflicts Forum, Alistair Crook. An article appearing on the Russia Insider website by Rostislav Ishchenko on October the 6th reports that the U.S. has allegedly received an ultimatum, something that has not happened since the British offered an ultimatum to the U.S. during the American Civil War. The article writes that after the President of the Russian Federation decreed that Russia was suspending implementation of the agreement with the U.S. on disposal of weapons-grade plutonium, and after submission of a draft law to Parliament, the media started to argue about whether this was related to the breakdown of cooperation on Syria. The second question was why Russia, knowing that the United States was not fulfilling its side of the deal, responded only after several years. This is not the first time the U.S. signs agreements and then breaks them. Russia's response could clearly not be compared to the U.S.'s official refusal to continue cooperation. The article adds the following. Although Putin has withdrawn Russia from the reprocessing agreement, he announced that it could be restarted under certain conditions, including canceling all sanctions against Russia, compensating Moscow for losses resulting not only from those sanctions, but from Russia's counter-sanctions, canceling the Magnitsky Act, reducing the American military presence in NATO countries near Russia's border, and ending the policy of confrontation with Moscow. Putin's demands can only be defined as an ultimatum, according to the article. Now, I could be wrong here, but here is what I am currently thinking. If the U.S. truly was in a strong and powerful position to take on Russia and the growing Eurasian alliance of countries, it would seem to me that the U.S. media would be attempting to rally the general public up into a war cry and patriotic messages and whatever other rhetoric they could dream up. They would be looking to get the public on their side as quickly as possible. And so far, attempts to do so have been failing. Having said this, perhaps this is why there are so many weapons of mass distraction being used at this time, to cover up the fact that the power controllers of the U.S. are not in as much control as they give themselves credit for. The article asks what other reasons there may be for Putin giving the U.S. such an ultimatum. The article offers these thoughts for consideration. The U.S. has long unofficially intimidated Russia with the threat of nuclear conflict, while Moscow let it be known that it was ready and was not going to retreat. Now, the Washington Hawks have decided to raise the ante during the last months of Obama's presidency and being uncertain of a Clinton victory. They have come to an extremely dangerous point when conflict has begun to develop independently. Moscow seized the initiative and raised the stakes, transforming the confrontation in another way. Unlike the United States, it did not threaten war, but gave a tough political and economic response, which, rather than making Obama's dream come true, threatens to ruin the U.S. economy should it misbehave. Russia's action has seriously undermined U.S. international prestige of the United States, showing that America can be beaten with its own weapon. As you give, so you receive. With this sequence of events, we could see hundreds of American elites in the dock in The Hague, referring to the International Criminal Court, not just in our lifetime, but before the end of the first term of the next American president. The U.S. must choose either to implement its threats and launch a nuclear war, or put up with the fact that this is no longer a unipolar world and begin to behave accordingly. The article strongly suggests that the U.S. is in a very weakened position, and there are enough desperate people still in power in the U.S. who may be willing to risk a nuclear war rather than give up the U.S. hegemony that they have enjoyed for so long. The U.S. will have to decide quickly how to react to the demands because countries formerly controlled by the U.S. will begin breaking away to join the growing multipolar alliance of countries. By the way, I still maintain my belief that there will not and cannot be any major nuclear war upon this planet any longer. So even though I am reporting this as an option, I want to assure my listeners that I do not accept this as any real possibility. Remember, as mentioned moments ago, Putin is a trained martial artist. His response will be timed and calculated. When he chooses to strike, he will strike and will strike hard. In this case, his strike came in a way that the warmongers in the U.S. were perhaps not expecting, it seems. They wanted a military response, and Putin is giving them a political and financial lesson in humility. The article closes with the following. Putin's ultimatum was a response to all who asked indignantly why Russian tanks had not captured Kiev or Lviv, and also Warsaw and Paris back in 2014, wondering what Putin's plan was. If you are going to have a confrontation with a world hegemon, you need to make sure that you will be able to respond to anything it does. The economy, the military, the government, and society all need to be ready. If you are not ready, you need to play for time. Russia appears to be playing all its cards now, and the U.S. will have to choose how to respond. The world has changed, and the article noted how the gauntlet has been thrown down at the U.S., and so far the U.S. has been very reluctant to pick it up. With just over a month away from a national election, the U.S. controllers are risking the canceling of an election through a declaration of war, or they are risking the admission of surrender and become the target of all the countries seeking compensation for the harm they have caused over many decades. There will be no world global war, at least nuclear. The cabal is being exposed, and I am creating and trusting that the higher forces that have been guiding the awakening of humanity and empowering the shift in human and planetary consciousness are not about to let all this go to waste. I am standing firmly and completely in my certainty of this. For those wishing to learn a bit more about Russia and its people, an article has been published by Nancy Detweiler on her Way of Love blog entitled Getting to Know the Beauty of Russia and Its People. The link is in the show summary for this story. In financial news, I choose to start with what some will consider to be the bad news, but I think most will welcome the information as being necessary and even desired at this time, for it leads to the changes that so many of us have been eagerly anticipating for a very long time. With October 1st bringing the introduction of the Chinese yuan to the global reserve currency basket of the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, those who are dependent upon the existence of the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency are beginning to find their reality as they currently know it being shaken to the core. As has also been reported previously on CVN, the original design of the U.S. dollar as a global reserve currency was never meant to be forever. The creators knew that a day would come when the debt created by a fractional reserve system of banking would no longer be sustainable. That time is now. What most of humanity is not yet aware of is how the bigger picture, the prophesized shift in human and planetary consciousness, is guiding and even directing the unfolding of the bigger picture, that is, the truth of all that is being exposed at this time relating to the enslavement of humanity and the destruction of the planet for profit, power, and control. Dick Weir, heard on this newscast in the past, was recently interviewed by Kerry Lutz of the Financial Survival Network. Here are a few comments made by Weir as he interprets what is currently unfolding.
Things can happen in a blink of an eye. For example, Deutsche Bank, a great example, is the looming S&P downgrade. I mean, S&P has already put them on negative watch, pending they don't turn things around and pending that these legal charges don't eat up all their Tier 1 capital. Well, they did that back in July, and now the United States Justice Department has just laid a $14 billion fine on Deutsche Bank, which is just really close to all of their Tier 1 capital. So the next move from what I call the good guys is for S&P to downgrade them, because they're still BBB+, which is investment grade.
It's investment grade, a couple notches above, yeah.
It's insane. And, they're talking to the government about a bailout, but S&P still has them rated investment grade. But I do think that S&P is going to be the next big move for Deutsche Bank. And what that does, depending on the significance of the downgrade, I think they're going to downgrade them to junk, to C, because of the, they don't have the money. They're selling off assets quickly. They're getting rid of their derivatives as best they can, but they're still knee-deep in nothing but trouble, and everybody on the government side, on the official side, is setting them up to be the kind of the white horse that dives off the cliff, shall we say, because the German government is saying, we're not going to bail you out. The U.S. government is saying, we're going to fine you for everything you've got. The Russians have a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that they got going on with them. There is no stop to this pain for Deutsche Bank, and given that they are the largest derivative holder in the world, that is the target. The target is to destroy that, which destroys everything else.
So once the derivatives go, what's going to be left standing here, Bix?
Nothing. No, we talked about that many times.
Yeah.
And Buffett was very right. It is derivatives are weapons of mass financial destruction. Everything goes. And those of you who think you're fine with your money in a local bank or a credit union, good luck with that, because the trickle-down effect of banks like Deutsche Bank going down, which will take down JP Morgan because they're counterparties to most of those derivatives, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and that's just the U.S. banks. It goes all throughout Europe, and it will really be a cascading effect. And the moment it starts is the crash of Deutsche Bank.
I need to remind listeners that Weir's comments appear to be based entirely on his perception of the current financial paradigm. Weir, as far as I know, has not commented specifically on a new financial paradigm that will need to replace the current paradigm. It is possible he has been hinting at it when he talks about gold prices and movement by China and so forth, but how one interprets what Weir just shared will give one an idea where one's awareness of global change is at right now. If one finds oneself falling into fear over his statements, it may suggest one is more grounded in the old paradigm and therefore choosing fear. I did not have time to listen to the full interview by Weir, so it is possible he could have said more relating to a new financial paradigm. The link will be in the show summary for those wishing to hear the full interview. On September 23rd, RT had reported that if the global economy enters a new economic crisis, it may lead to epic debt default, according to trade economists at the United Nations. What may be misleading is that the article attempts to pin the blame on the emerging economies and does not seem to address any fault as being connected to Western corporations and institutions. Only the day before, on September 22nd, an article on the True News website had reported that economists at the United Nations are predicting the greatest debt jubilee in history. The article added that the UN's advice to the emerging nations is to retake control of their destiny and turn the tables on the financial elite. They should impose capital controls, preferential tax treatment for retained earnings, and force fund managers to hold assets for longer. They should allocate credit without apology and learn a trick or two from the Korea's methods of financial repression. What is clear is that the world will soon need a massive and coordinated spending push by governments to create demand and bring the broken global system back into equilibrium. The Rubicon for global change has now been crossed, and there is no going back to anything even remotely close to the world we once knew, even as little as 2 years ago. A new path is being charted, and although many may be in states of denial about what is going on, it is only a matter of time before it becomes abundantly clear that it is time to rebuild and co-create something better for humanity and for our planet. As we heard moments ago, massive change is happening. Looking now to offer some more reassuring news on the financial front, we look to an article that was posted on October 3rd on the Geopolitics website. The article reported the following. The gradual global reset continues with the official inclusion of the Chinese yuan, or renminbi, as prime alternative to the US dollar as global currency of exchange, which should provide a smooth transition away from all fiat currencies. While this FDR inclusion was pre-announced months ago, still the multiple investigations of fraudulent bank services and the ongoing fall of the big banks suggest that the ongoing global reset will continue no matter the geopolitical noise, which are all part of the hybrid World War III being fought against the outgoing Zionist world order. When one considers the fact that the Chinese yuan is backed with real, tangible, hard assets, for example, gold and industrial infrastructure, it would be very easy to say that the US dollar is doomed, as it should be, since its integrity and real value are nil at this point in time. The article continues, validating much of what Weir commented on moments ago. Western banks are crumbling under the weight of massive debts that can no longer be sustained. Kenneth Shortkin, writing for RogueMoney.net, reported on October 1st that China's central bank said Saturday that the country will continue to push financial reforms and market opening after the inclusion of its currency renminbi into the basket of IMF. The article continues. Last month, China was given the power over internationalizing and selling MSDR bonds, which would help expand the international currency for use in trade settlement. And this move, coupled with the renminbi's increase in global settlement, is a de facto Bretton Woods-type maneuver that has the intended purpose of ending the polar reserve currency mechanism that has run the global financial system for the past 70 years. The yuan's inclusion into the FDR is just the first step into a much bigger game, and economic analyst Jim Rickards said on September 29th what and when the next move will probably take place. What is that next development? The article reports that on October 7th, the IMF will hold its annual meeting in Washington, D.C. to consider additional steps to expand the role of FDRs and make China an integral part of the new world money order. But there's another looming development that has implications for the adoptions of FDRs, and that is the return of BRICS. As many know, BRICS is the acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which are among the largest emerging market economies and make up about 22% of the global GDP, or gross domestic product. 5 years ago, discussions in international monetary circles was all about the rise of BRICS. It appeared the BRICS would mount a serious challenge to US dollar hegemony. Then the BRICS story went quiet in 2014 and 2015. It looked like the BRICS story was fading in importance, but now that is changing. At the G20 Leaders Summit in Hangzhou, China, earlier this month, BRICS made a very interesting demand. They may be 22% of the global economy, but they only hold 14.89% of the votes at the IMF. Any individual country or group of countries with 15% has veto power over certain major IMF decisions, including the issuance of FDRs. Only one country has over 15% today, and that is the United States. The BRICS are now demanding that their IMF vote move closer to their share of the world economy and past the 15% threshold. If that happens, then the IMF will not be able to flood the world with FDRs in a liquidity crisis unless the BRICS agree. Now, no doubt the BRICS will agree, but only if other steps are taken at the same time to destroy the privileged position of the US dollar in global payments and reserves. The BRICS are back in town, and it has implications for the adoptions of SDRs and also for the dollar. What does it all mean? The article also offers that what this means in a nutshell is that a consortium of nations led primarily by China now have the power to remove the U.S.'s autonomous control over the IMF and other facets of global finance, and will seek to even out the voting rights within a dedicated financial infrastructure currently holding sway over the global monetary system. China has never sought to usurp the U.S. nor take its place by having a singular reserve currency as the medium of exchange in global trade settlement. However, they are no longer in a position to have to rely upon the dollar to be economically sustainable, or in U.S. hegemony to carry out their sovereign goals of bilateral trade. The first step in a long game of transition is now complete, and the next steps will be to both end the petrodollar's hold over global trade and to end America's domination over the world's monetary system. After that, the steps leading towards the end game appear to be a return of the gold standard in some form or fashion, and to help rebuild the world's overall economy that is now collapsing under the weight of its inescapable debt. It has been alleged that contained within the text of the Paris Agreement on climate change, signed earlier this year in France, that there are also agreements leading to changes in the global financial system. I have not read the agreement in English, but in the show summary, links will be provided to the text of the agreement in several languages, English, Russian, Spanish, and French, for those who wish to read it and perhaps learn more. Also in the show summary will be a link to the IMF press release announcing the yuan as being a part of the FDR basket. Another source who is referred to on this newscast from time to time is William Engdahl, a strategic risk consultant. On October 4th, Engdahl posted an article to his personal blog about what the shifting political and financial events are leading to. And, to no surprise, and much the same as CVN has been reporting, it is that a growing Eurasian alliance of countries is becoming unstoppable. According to Engdahl, what I've seen in my many visits to China and have studied about the entirety of this enormously impressive international infrastructure project convinces me that a Eurasian century at this point is unstoppable. The idiotic wars of the Washington warhawks and their military industry in Syria, in Ukraine, Libya, Iraq, and now the South China Sea provocations against China are not going to stop what is now clearly the most impressive and economically altering project in more than a century. The term American century was triumphantly proclaimed in a famous editorial in Life magazine in 1941 in the early phase of World War II, before the U.S. had even entered the war, to describe the system publisher Henry Luce saw dominating the post-war world after the fall of the rival British Empire. The American century has lasted a mere 7 decades if we date from the end of the war. Its record has been one of dismal failure on balance. The industrial base of the United States, the predominant leading industrial nation and leading scientific innovator today, is a hollowed, rotted shell with once booming cities like Detroit or Philadelphia or Los Angeles, now burned-out ghettos of unemployed and homeless. The federal debt of the United States, owing to the endless wars its presidents engage in, as well as the fruitless bailouts of Wall Street banks and government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae, is well over 103% of GDP at an astonishing $19.5 trillion, or more than 163,000 per tax-paying American. And Washington is adding to the debt this year at nearly $600 billion. Countries like China and Russia are moving away from subsidizing that debt at a record pace. America's economic basic infrastructure, bridges, sewer and water treatment plants, electric grid, railways, and highways have been neglected for more than 4 decades for a variety of reasons. The American Society of Civil Engineers recently estimated that gross domestic product will be reduced by $4 trillion between 2016 and 2025 because of lost business sales, rising costs, and reduced incomes if the country continues to underinvest in its infrastructure. That is on top of the fact that they estimate the country at present urgently requires new infrastructure investment of $3.3 trillion by the coming decade just to renew. Yet, U.S. states and cities are not able to finance such an investment in the future in the present debt situation, nor is the debt-choked federal government, so long as a cartel of corrupt, brain-dead Wall Street banks and financial funds hold America to ransom. This is the sunset for the American century, a poorly disguised imperial experiment in hubris and arrogance by a gaggle of boring old patriarchs like David Rockefeller and his friends on Wall Street and in the military industry. It is the starkest contrast to what is going on to the east and across all Eurasia today. Engdahl goes into what the Eurasian project will look like and what is being called the OBOR, or One Belt, One Road. He writes, there will be two main routes of the OBOR. On land, there are several routes or corridors in work. The initiative will focus on jointly building what is being called a new Eurasian land bridge from China via Kazakhstan on to Rotterdam. Other OBOR land rail corridors include developing China, Mongolia, Russia, China, Central Asia, West Asia, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, and China, Indochina Peninsula economic corridors. This is huge. It will build on international transport routes relying on core cities along the OBOR route and using key economic industrial parks as cooperation platforms. At sea, the initiative will focus on jointly building smooth, secure, and efficient transport routes connecting major sea ports along the Belt and Road, including modern, upgraded superport construction that will link present China ports at Haikou and Fujian with Kuala Lumpur's port in Malaysia at the Malacca Strait Passage, Calcutta in India, Nairobi in Kenya, and via the Suez Canal to Athens and beyond. Crucial is that land and sea ports of OBOR are seen as one whole circulatory system or flow of trade. The OBOR initiative will link key Eurasian ports with interior rail and pipeline infrastructure in a way not before seen. To date, China has signed memoranda of understanding with 56 countries and regional organizations regarding OBOR. This represents a major movement towards the east. In other words, if a game of chess were being played, it might seem that it is now check and mate for the U.S. and the U.S. dollar. In general news, although there are still many who doubt the power of planetary alignments and the effects of their energies upon humanity and the planet, there are arguments, however, that could be made to suggest that the science of astrology may just have as much bearing and importance as any other science. Indigenous and Asian cultures have long recognized the significance not only of extraterrestrial civilizations, but also energetic alignments of planets and numbers. Perhaps one reason for this is because the planetary alignments are more constant relative to human-created calendar systems, such as the Gregorian calendar. Human-created systems for calculating the passage of time come with their own unique flaws, such as trying to discern exactly when the Mayan calendar was supposed to come to an end, using a Gregorian system of dating, for example. Carl Boudreau, an individual who appears to be gaining a strong following with his astrological interpretations, offers some insights for the month of October. His report is too long to include in the newscast, but the following are some selected highlights to help one perhaps understand better the astrological alignments and the unfolding events over the past 6 years or so. Boudreau writes the following. Jupiter recently entered Libra in the context of a major astrological transition. A powerful astrological configuration has dominated global affairs for something approaching half a century. This slow breakup in this configuration was the context of Jupiter's Libra ingress. The thought patterns and social, political, and economic structures that this configuration called into being are being tested. The bill for work undone, for challenges unmet, and problems neglected and mishandled are coming due. As we explore the massive power and control that the global cabal has had, especially over the last 100 years or so, planetary alignments may offer some hints. Boudreau writes that by late 1971, the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, had all begun lengthy transits of the six signs, Libra through Pisces, associated with our professional and governing elite. We might refer to these signs collectively as the institutional or administrative signs. Many may recall that this was the period when Nixon removed the gold standard for currency in the U.S., and shortly after this, in 1974, Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau sold out the Bank of Canada to the Rothschild banking cartel. Boudreau adds that by the end of 1980, Saturn and Jupiter had joined Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in the administrative signs. In other words, Jupiter and Saturn also became part of what, for reasons that will soon become apparent, I refer to as the oligarchic alignment. The basic three-planet alignment remained in effect for nearly 40 years. Singly or together, Jupiter and Saturn would have had part of that alignment for much of that time. The three outer planets are especially powerful. Individually, each exercise immense influence over an entire region of collective consciousness for an extended period. Collectively, they strongly influence the totality of collective consciousness. Their influence is global. This influence is intensified when all three bodies are concentrated in one part of the zodiac. It's even greater when, as was the case, the signs involved include the home signs of all three planets, Uranus in Aquarius, Neptune in Pisces, and Pluto in Scorpio. With Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto in houses controlled by the 1% decided what, if anything, ever warranted protest or needed reform, this under the influence of Uranus. They were empowered to choose which ideal would guide us, this being the Neptune influence, and they also decided who should hold power, how it should be wielded, and why, with the Pluto influence. For much of the time, the oligarchs also decided what was logical and legal under the Saturn influence, who would become wealthy, how wealthy they would become, who would share in that wealth, and why was under the influence of Jupiter. For going on half a century, the oligarchs made virtually all the rules. They won every hand. They decided every case. By the end, they called every shot. The planets in the alignment had no rival. To break the power of the oligarchic movement, and not just vary it, one or more of the three outer planets in the alignment would have to move out of the six institutional signs into Aries. The alignments over the last 40 years in particular have strongly favored the 1% and their agenda for global control and domination. This, however, began to change around 2010. Boudreau writes the following: when Uranus entered Aries in 2010-2011, the extraordinarily powerful alignment behind the global oligarchic madness began breaking up. In the years that have followed since 2010, Boudreau offers insights about each of the significant planets and their movements to alignments that empower the collective humanity and not the elitist 1%. It was around 2010 when the collective consciousness began to awaken and put the global cabal into a more defensive position. With Jupiter's recent entry into the sign of Libra, Boudreau observes that this is a shift from impairment to a position for empowerment of humanity. Boudreau offers that Jupiter's movement into Libra will further moderate and mitigate the effects of the oligarchic alignment. Over time, it will loosen Pluto's obsessive grip on our affairs and lessen the harshness of its influence. In the coming year, as Jupiter moves quickly towards Scorpio, Jupiter will also achieve definitive leverage over Uranus in Aries. In Scorpio, Jupiter will also enjoy a more harmonious relationship with Pluto and a more intimate, positive interaction with Saturn. Jupiter is, above all, a generous and compassionate influence. In Libra, with its leverage over Saturn, Pluto, and Neptune, it will inject common sense and decency into the fraught, vexed negotiations between the 99% and the 1%. Perhaps this is not exactly news by itself, but I offer this as a news story to try to help people who are just awakening to begin connecting to a bigger picture of how things are falling into place, to help those who are ready to receive this empowerment and begin to use their services for the overall and highest good of humanity and our planet. This information represents one of the dots that can be connected within the overall picture. Boudreau's messages are posted on his Facebook page, and he offers more detailed information for those interested in astrological alignments and their impact on human and planetary consciousness. The link is in the show summary for this story for those choosing to learn more. Over to Science News now, and we continue the series of reports relating to the science of consciousness and its impact on human and planetary consciousness at this time. Nikola Tesla is quoted as saying the following: "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." He is also quoted as saying that the day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in one decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. In the past, on this newscast, we have explored a little bit how science is validating that reality, as humans currently think of it, as being expanding from a linear reality to a more quantum reality, and that perhaps there are multiple timelines upon which humanity shifts as humans align their frequencies with certain truths. As people connect to the vibrations of a more energetic existence, their reality begins to shift to timelines that support that reality. As others fall into fear and negativity, they may begin to find themselves more and more following timelines that will justify the reality they are choosing to see and experience. Perhaps there are many of you who, like me and others I know, have been experiencing memory gaps or things not being exactly as we thought we remembered them. This particular phenomenon has been named the Mandela effect and has been covered in previous newscasts. Tom Kenyon, in an article appearing on the How to Exit the Matrix website on September 22nd, wrote the following: "The magnetic field of Earth is involved in a perturbation, or morphing, as he calls it. This is taking place interdimensionally, and the net effect is incremental surges in amplitude or strength of the magnetic field. This morphing of Earth's magnetic field is like a wave that rises and falls very quickly, and the oscillations are minute but distinct. This is having a very strange effect upon human consciousness, specifically your biological experience. Many people are experiencing an increase of exhaustion and weariness. These symptoms are also caused by movements of energies from deep space as they pass through your galaxy and your solar system." Kenyon describes that the energies and magnetic field of the planet are morphing, and it is aligning more the energies that exist beyond Earth. Kenyon invites people to consider this phenomenon as a form of communication, a conversation that Earth is having with the cosmos. Kenyon continues, "Science does not view things in this manner, but from our perspective, the magnetic field is having a conversation with these cosmic visitors, the energies from deep space, which are, by nature, catalysts for spiritual evolution." Another set of symptoms directly related to the morphing of your magnetic field are distinct changes in how you hold short-term memory, because memory is a function of the magnetics of your own nervous system and that of Earth. Your brain processes information through the minute gravitational and non-gravitational fields of its own structure, and it is affected directly by fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. And so you can expect an increase in short-term memory anomalies. You may find yourself speaking a sentence and suddenly the words do not come to you, or you mix up the words from their normal syntax. Although there is the possibility that some will have legitimate brain disorders causing these symptoms, Kenyon feels this experience will be expanding among healthier humans, and it is going to create opportunities or curses depending upon how one perceives it. Kenyon notes the forces that have been enslaving humanity and controlling the planet, writing that we have said before that there are forces on your planet that actively resist the impulse for spiritual evolution. They are invested in continuing their lies through the misappropriation of information in order to control you. Their job is getting more difficult. Their job is getting more difficult because the morphing of the magnetic field creates gaps in the creation of mental realities projected by the human mind. They, meaning those who wish to control and manipulate you, have vast resources at their command, and they are employing every one of them. But they cannot control the magnetic field of the Earth, and for this, you should give thanks. Kenyon offers suggestions how one can deal with this unfolding situation if one is ready to do so. First, by understanding one's connection to the core of the Earth herself. He writes that by going into mental resonance with the core of the Earth, the generator of Earth's magnetic field, you become energetically stabilized. The Earth, as a conscious being, can reveal herself to you in ways that are difficult to describe because your culture does not have a language for this. And you have been manipulated and controlled to ensure that you do not have an awareness of this, for it could be one of your greatest strengths. As this is done, a suggestion offered is to begin developing a conscious relation to the core of the galaxy. Kenyon adds that it is quite simple, but requires the understanding that a part of you is not limited by the time and space coordinates of your physical body. It requires an understanding that consciousness can extend instantaneously anywhere in time and space, and by extending your consciousness to the galactic core, you are stabilized in relationship to the galaxy. The ideal is to be in relationship to Earth's core and to the core of the galaxy simultaneously. Then you will be able to ride the waves of energy from deep space with a greater degree of mastery. In closing, he notes that this awareness will make you less controllable and harder to hypnotize. I have tried several times to have people hypnotize me, and it has not worked, even though I was open to trying it. Romeo Barron, in a September 24th article on the Humans Are Free website, offers this information. At the time of the planetary dimensional shift, those that have lifted their frequency beyond the old vibratory rate will not undergo physical death. It will be harmless because they will be anchored to the planet while it shifts from third dimension to the fifth dimension. Barron invites readers to imagine an hourglass with the 3D reality on one side and the 5D reality on the other side. Barron writes that in the middle of the hourglass, this narrow gap represents the gateway or the fourth dimensional portal for the planetary shift that occurs when two dimensional planes eclipse each other. It is a highly charged membrane of photons which acts as the wavelength bridge to connect one side of the dimensional frequency band with the next highest band. All living things on this planet have two parallel bodies. The biological body is carbon matter, and it interfaces with the ethereal body. The ethereal body exists as plasma antimatter. To consciously experience the dimensional shift, the ethereal body needs to be at the same wavelength as the ethereal frequency of the planet. This is what Kenyon was sharing a few moments ago, bringing oneself into a direct relation with the frequency vibration of the planet and galactic core. This will cause challenges for all who have not yet begun this process. Barron writes that the people who have not raised their frequency or do not raise their frequency now will not be able to physically handle the wave of high-frequency energy as the planet enters through the dimensional gateway. Their bodies will disconnect from the planet's ethereal body during the shift. Barron adds that this is how the spiritual selection process works. The current calamities we are experiencing right now on the planet with the destructive actions such as war, pollution, nuclear waste, have a direct impact on the planet's life force because any negative energy stored within our ethereal bodies filters directly into the planet's ethereal body. And this is how the controllers are trying to stop the planet from shifting into the next dimension. The good news, as Kenyon also noted moments ago, is that the global cabal cannot control the magnetic field of the Earth, and this might explain why humanity is now beginning to win the battle against a formerly powerful group of disconnected humans. Barron explains how he believes this transition will take place, writing that our consciousness is energy, and will be traveling as energy, and we will actually flow as light energy through the dimensional gateway. But we might not really feel it, because it will take about a second to travel through the dimensional gateway, and we will be rematerialized on the other side in 5D, or 5th dimension. When we undergo this frequency jump, our ethereal body, which contains the blueprint of our physical body, will automatically be rematerialized. Our body will have the same physical appearance as it does right now, except our new body will be crystal silica, because the higher frequencies from the solar flares have altered the atomic structure of our bodies. All man-made objects and synthetic materials within the third dimensional reality will disintegrate during the shift. So most of humanity's current technology will not exist after the shift. Barron closes with the following. During the shift, man-made synthetic objects will begin to fade out and disappear from our view. But at the same time, new Earth will begin to appear and materialize around us. So the shift will act as a three-dimensional filter. Any item or object that has a third-dimensional frequency will spin off the planet and disappear when we move into a fifth-dimensional frequency. The dimensional shift will be the catalyst for some major transmutations to the planet. Everything will look brighter, and there will be new shapes and colors which will define our new plane of reality. You will notice that some family and friends are not with you. Please understand that a greater part of the world's population, for whatever reason, will decide not to ascend to a new Earth. We are now in crucial times. This is the moment of truthfulness for every being on the planet. The bottom line is, everyone will ascend at the time of the planetary shift, but not everyone will choose to ascend to the new Earth. A question some may ask is whether our consciousness is somehow wired or connected to something much larger, and that something is now being activated with some humans at one time and other humans at other times. Greg Prescott, in an in5d.com article back in March of 2014, explored this phenomenon. He writes, "Many people feel like Earth isn't their home, as if they are visiting here in this incarnation from another planet. Is this a premonition of what is about to come. More than 2 years later, I'm sure there are many listeners who have found an answer to this question that has become their truth in this current moment of now. Prescott goes into the work of the late Dolores Cannon, who has done past life regression with thousands of individuals who have claimed to have memories of life on other planets, or who feel that they are not from Earth. Prescott refers to the work of scientist Dean Radin, writing that global consciousness, sometimes called field consciousness, is the notion that when groups of people focus their minds on the same thing, they influence the world at large. Although I personally have not yet connected to conscious memories of a lifetime beyond Earth, I am pretty much convinced that I have had past life experiences beyond Earth, and I am also of the feeling that I am connected to another planetary civilization, although I am not yet sure which one. It is just a knowing, and I feel it when I look at the stars, which is quite often. Will things happen this way? I guess this will depend upon how one chooses to focus one's energies. If they do not believe that this is at least possible, then they will not participate in this shift, and this will not be their reality, and they will be sent somewhere else according to a frequency that is in alignment with their belief system. I do not know if this is exactly how a change like this will unfold. There are elements of this that definitely feel true to me personally, and I am expanding my understanding of the larger science related to shifts of this nature. Given the events happening on Earth now, and also given the fact that I do not want to grow old in this particular vibration, I would rather focus on creating something better than risk getting stuck living the rest of a physical life as a slave to the current frequencies. Finally, in kind of health-related news, if most of you are like me, you may be finding yourself starting to withdraw more and more from people around you. You may be discovering that you are no longer interested in small talk, the term given to topics of conversation that do not have any real meaning, but people talk about them because they are unable or unwilling to engage people on the more meaningful subjects. An article from the Alternative World News Network via the Minds website on September 23rd looks at small talk. The article shares the following. A study performed by Dan Ariely, a professor of psychology and behavioral economics at Duke University, and Kristen Berman, founder of Irrational Labs, showed an interesting change in humans when small talk was banned from a dinner party. The article details how the rules were set up, and the 27 guests of mixed gender were informed that once at the event, there was to be no small talk. The article continues. The 27 gender-mixed guests discussed if they should hold public officials accountable and how to do it. They debated the theory of suicide prevention, and they talked about the art of the dominatrix, all conversations that may not normally be heard walking down the street. The result was a bonding experience, with two sets of people even setting up dates after having bomb conversations. Interestingly, people were more engaged and appeared more free to talk about the things they really wanted to talk about. It was interesting to note that by setting up rules about what cannot be talked about, people actually became more free, even enforcing the no small talk rule amongst themselves. Many of us, myself included, have tried to engage strangers on meaningful topics of conversation. I was sitting on a morning train to Toronto on Tuesday and heard women discussing the U.S. presidential debate the night before. One woman said something, and I decided to engage her by saying, "You may be closer to the truth on that than you know right now." The women became curious, and they were really surprised when I told them that I do not believe that there will be an election in November. One asked why, and I offered my thoughts, and they listened for a few moments before rapidly changing the subject, which signaled they were no longer interested. I smiled at that. Later that day, on the train leaving Toronto, I was sitting in the quiet part of a crowded train. A woman sat across from me, and we didn't talk for part of the trip, but her bag fell onto my leg, and this started a conversation. She was really engaged in all that I had to say, and a passenger actually got mad at us for talking in the quiet part of the train. We eventually moved to another part of the train to continue the discussion. She, however, was really keen to learn more, and she was fascinated about the energetic dynamics of relations with partners at this time, because it seemed that she was experiencing that with her current partner. So it takes a willingness to engage on both parts in a conversation that is more than just about weather or a sports team or even something as meaningless as this year's U.S. presidential debate. The article continues. It is no doubt that most everyone seeks a deeper meaning and a real connection. By forcing yourself out of your shell, you can really get through to people who likely want the same thing you do, talking about what you feel is important. By establishing a common rule for behavior, we created an environment with a new set of social norms that redefined people's best interests, write the authors, adding that everyone was happier once they dropped the small talk and went for the meaty, real stuff. By way of an announcement for this week, there are sources reporting that Facebook has allegedly begun closing down pages of activists, and that they are doing this in partnership with Israel. Although it may not happen, I just want to inform listeners that if an attempt is made to shut down either my private profile or the CVN profile, that I will be continuing to post the show summary link on a couple of other social media, including LinkedIn and Minds.com. There are people who have joined the CVN profile page on the Seen social media, but this website has not been allowing me to sign in for about 4 months now, and they will not respond to my request to allow me to access this page. For those of you who are listening who may have joined the CVN page on the Scene.life website, I'm sorry, but I am unable to get into that account. Also, if anyone should receive friendship requests from me, please disregard those, as they are more than likely fake accounts being set up. If you get a request from me, look up my profile in your friend list and you should see that we are already connected. Also, if anyone should see anything offensive posted in my name, please know that it was not me. Except on rare occasions, I only post the CVN show summary links each week. If I do post something else, it will only be on my personal page or the Facebook page for Cosmic Vision News. Facebook is limiting my reach with the show posting, and because of this, I believe it is having an impact on the number of listeners. As I am currently unable to put CVN back onto another radio network, I'm going to have to find new ways to market CVN to help restore the audience numbers that the program used to have. For now, I can only rely on listeners who are willing to share the links I post, and I know that there are at least 10 to 15 people who regularly share my show postings. I thank each of you for doing this, and I also wish to publicly thank Gordon once again, who very kindly donates his time to put my audio newscast into a YouTube video format for the benefit of those who prefer to listen via CVN's YouTube channel. It is my hope to expand CVN into a video newscast when the resources are present and air the newscast via this channel, YouTube, or via the Vimeo channel. Once again, if anyone should see anything negative that is posted in my name or in the name of Cosmic Vision News, it is not from me. And if you have any doubts, please contact me through the email info@cosmicvisionnews.com, and I will be happy to answer questions about anything I am alleged to have posted. It would be nice to get everyone to move over to Minds.com, but I know I cannot ask everyone to do this immediately. There are various new social media coming out, and I will be exploring those as well. If you feel open to doing so, however, joining Minds, please feel free to connect with me on the Minds.com website until another more suitable solution presents itself for all of us trying to change the world. In this week's final words, there is perhaps something odd about how humans look at things and interpret or perceive them. It is, however, partly what contributes to each human being uniquely different and yet equally beautiful as humanity moves through its current evolutionary transformation. Those among us who are trying to help make the world a better place, those who are ready, willing, awake, aware, and courageous enough to challenge the status quo, meaning our current paradigm of living and being upon this planet, are sorely criticized by many others who do not understand the complexity and magnitude of the change we are attempting to help create upon this planet. Some people in this group, and I will not say all of them, some people within this group will say that they are tired of hearing all of us talk about our messages of peace, harmony, love, compassion, and co-creation as though we are broken records, saying the same thing over and over and over again, when everything they see in their reality is not peace, harmony, love, compassion, and co-creation. Ironically, it is also many of these same people who eagerly sit in front of their TVs night after night, listening to the mainstream media repeat their messages over and over and over again, and they eagerly absorb it and embrace their messages without even acknowledging the contradiction in this behavior. Those attempting to change the world have been at a disadvantage over the last few decades, as the various parts of the global cabal have used all of their tools and technologies to reach people, more effectively, more successfully, and much more quickly. Joseph Goebbels and Adolf Hitler have been credited with saying almost the same thing, but allegedly in different ways. Goebbels has been credited with saying that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. Hitler has been credited with saying, make the lie big, make it simple, keep saying it, and eventually they will believe it. There is a similar quote that seems to also be credited to Goebbels, and it goes like this: the most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is borne in mind constantly. It must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over. Our planet has historically been governed by several ideas existing at the same time, but in paradox to each other. Many states have been governed indirectly or directly through religion, various religious messages that have taught its believers that their belief of a divine creator is right, while everyone else is wrong. Religion has said over and over certain key messages of belief within each system, and people have chosen to accept those messages and systems of belief until they no longer choose so. People in politics, people in finance, people in law, people in medicine, people in schools, people in the media, police officers, and others. It is all the same thing. These people have been indoctrinated with a standard set of messages that are unique to each of those professions, and people live by those messages because a debt-based society forces them to keep the job they have. There is also the bureaucracy in governance. How many times have you gone to a government office only to be told that you have to have your social identity number or an original birth certificate or only a government-issued ID with a photo on it? If one asks the employees why it is necessary, they will simply tell you that it is the law, or those are the rules. The employees have no idea what it is they are enforcing, but they are told to do so under threat of being fired from their jobs. Thus, those in power, by shielding themselves with one or more layers of bureaucracy, are able to prevent the people who are awake and aware from challenging their power. If one needs a new passport, for example, and this is now the case for me personally, if I question anything, I'm simply told it is the law and that they cannot do anything about it. The truth is that they could do something about it, but they are unwilling to do anything about it. Hence, this is why the awakening has taken so much longer among those of us who are awake and aware. It frustrates and angers many, and I admit I have my times when negative thoughts come up regarding individuals and situations. It is in these moments that I have to try to ground myself and acknowledge what I am feeling without directing those energies at other individuals. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail. People think that things are bad right now, and this will depend upon their perspective, as I have recently commented on this newscast. Those who see negativity are lacking the connection to the bigger picture and also the bigger picture. Those who understand what is happening are more easily able to adapt to the flow of all that is unfolding at this time. A message this week from John Smallman on his blog shares a message from an entity that he identifies as Yeshua or Jesus. In part of this message, Jesus, through Smallman, shares that chaos and confusion appear to be increasing across the planet, but in fact, what is happening is just the rising to the surface of humanity's consciousness, many long-held beliefs and judgments which are being acted out. It's just part of humanity's awakening process. All the negative and judgmental ideas and concepts to which humanity has been clinging for eons have to be released in order for you to awaken, and in some cases, as you can see, they are being engaged with and acted out, often very violently. Many of you light holders have become aware of this and are working steadfastly to let go of all your own unloving thoughts and beliefs that you have discovered buried or denied deep within yourself, which are now arising into your awareness and, in many cases, shocking you. All humans have buried and denied unloving thoughts and desires. They are all aspects of the illusion, of the state of separation from divine source that you chose to experience. So perhaps we, as the group of humans who are serving more actively at this time until others step into their own awakening, have to continue saying certain things over and over and over. If we keep saying them, and perhaps if we continue saying them loudly enough, more and more people will start getting the subtle message that it may be time for them to awaken to their service also, in whatever way this was meant to be, for the highest good of humanity and the planet. A message from Rona Herman, who receives messages from Archangel Michael, shares that the miracle of these times is that the masses are awakening in greater numbers every day. You, the vanguard, have opened the way, and you have set the stage for the monumental transformational process that is sweeping the world. Through your tireless efforts, you have anchored the higher frequencies of light upon and within the earth, thereby making them available to all those who are ready to open their hearts and step onto the path of heightened awareness and self-mastery. Each person has the ability to create his or her own unique heaven on earth. That is the miracle of these unparalleled times in which you are living. You are stretching your spiritual muscles and you are tapping into the vast resources which have been awaiting you for these many ages. Many of you are wondering what will happen now as the winds of war, conflict, and destruction swirl like a dark and heavy cloud around the earth, touching and affecting everything and everyone. Are you contributing to the liberating vibrations of heaven or to the discordant frequencies of hell? We are asking you to no longer sit passively by the wayside and do nothing. You are being asked to stand up and be counted. As your beliefs change and gain power and force, you will build a new thought form, and you will insist that your leaders be accountable, that they have integrity, and are true, valiant heroes and champions of the people. Your leaders reflect the mindset of the masses. So, continue to address whatever is coming up within for your healing and release, and continue to touch as many lives as possible, even if it is only with a subtle question as you listen to others talking on a train. Walk by, perhaps politely excuse yourself, and perhaps leave them with a question to ponder in their discussion. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, available on the website and in the blog. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, Minds page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that if one tells a lie that is big enough, and they keep repeating it, others will come to accept it as truth. But truth is the greatest enemy to governing states and entities that have been hijacked and corrupted by the global cabal. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your heart. Keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.